Good evening, and welcome to Portland Rising, our monthly news, interview, and arts program produced by the New Portland Phoenix. One important aspect of the Portland Phoenix has been our arts coverage, and we've worked hard to provide great critics covering theater, music, and the local art scene. And tonight, we're very pleased to have with us Edgar Beem, who has written about art in Maine since 1978 and really is the senior art critic in this state. And he also writes a weekly opinion column for us called The Universal Notebook, which covers many topics, both political and personal. We're very grateful for the help that Edgar has provided for us in starting up the Portland Phoenix. So Ed, again, thank you for being with us tonight.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
And all that you've done for the Phoenix. And going to talk about the art scene in Maine, and the most recent show that you wrote about is, of course, the Portland Museum of Art Triennial.
So tell us... North Atlantic Triennial. Yep.
Right. Okay, thank you. Tell us how that was different from their previous work, what you thought about it, and why it was important.
We got a half an hour?
Just about.
Okay, I think I can do it in half an hour.
Right.
The North Atlantic Triennial, and this is the catalog,
right.
And it's an interesting catalog because it's in English, Swedish, and Icelandic. It is an attempt to put some Maine artists in an international context, in particular the context of North Atlantic countries and states and provinces. So there are 30 artists, and 7 are from Maine, but there are a handful from the Atlantic Canada provinces, and then there are artists from all the Scandinavian countries. And it is a collaboration between and among the Portland Museum of Art and museums in Reykjavik and in Sweden. And I think it was the brainchild of the Portland Museum of Art's curator, Jamie DeSimone, who's done a lot of good work since she has gotten here, and she's got another big show later this summer, a big retrospective of Kathy Bradford that she's curated. But the triennial it differs from previous biennials in that most of the previous biennial, every 2-year exhibitions, were open juried shows. And artists, particularly Maine artists, prefer open juried shows because they get to submit their work, and so they know they were considered, and they usually submit them to a distinguished jury, often of out-of-state art professionals. And this is a curated show, which gives the curators make the selections, and they can entertain it, look at anyone that they want. Initially, a lot of Maine artists were upset when the museum announced that it was going to try this triennial format, this international, because the funding for the biennials, which the Portland Museum has done since 1998, and there were a series of all Maine biennials that were funded by the Maine Arts Commission back in the 80s. And they started, I think the first one was 1979 at Bowdoin, and then they moved around. They went to University of Southern Maine a couple of times, and to Colby, and Portland Museum also had one. But the money that the museum used to put on its biennials came from a bequest of the artist William Thorne. And he left the money specifically for an exhibition of Maine artists. And so when the announcement was made that they were going to include Scandinavian and Canadian artists, a number of artists were upset about perhaps the misuse of Thon's bequest, including actually one of the former directors of the Portland Museum of Art, went to the media and said this was an affront and a violation and breaking faith with Thon. But what a lot of people didn't understand, and I keep on my computer Thon's bequest because it comes up so often, and what he said at the time was that he recognized that there would be times when, for any number of reasons, valid reasons, the Portland Museum of Art may decide not to present a biennial juried show of works of Maine artists. Actually, he said Maine painters. And he was all right with their using his money to do other things. And what a lot of artists who raise the Thon flag and say this is a violation of his intent don't realize is that Thon left his money specifically for an exhibition of painters. No photographers, no sculptors, no printmakers, no craftspeople. And he defined a Maine painter as somebody who painted and lived here year round.
So you support, you were comfortable with the decision that they made to do something different this year?
Yeah, I think the museum has done a good job trying to be more and more inclusive and less provincial. And it's there are a number of ambitious people running the place. Sometimes I wonder whether they may be biting off more than they can chew. We may, if we have time, discuss some of their plans. But when they came up with the idea of a triennial, they got 2 other museums involved, 2 other curators, and the thing that interests me is in looking at the show is that some of the artists, there's a nucleus of artists whose work might be said to reflect a North Atlantic, not aesthetic, but experience. So quite a few pieces that have something to do with climate change and glaciers melting, and several pieces that have to do with the displacement of the native and natural indigenous peoples, whether it's the Micmac in Maine and Canada, or the Sami people in Finland, Laplanders. In fact, the one piece that didn't make it here to the Triennial was an artist who decorated 2 skulls of reindeer, and apparently they couldn't get it through customs. It was something about animal parts or something. So that's only going to be I think in the Swedish show. But there are a number of artists whose work might be said to share an interest in environmental and natural phenomena and the cultures of the northern countries that it represents. But there are also in each case of the 3 curators, there are artists in the show whose work really has little or nothing specific to do with Maine or the North Atlantic. For instance, 2 of the best, they just happen to be, really good and interesting artists. So there are 7 artists who work in Maine, and the 2 most prominent there are Lauren Fensterstock from right here in Portland, and Reggie Burroughs Hodges, who teaches at the Maine College of Art, but lives in his studio in Lewiston, I believe, and he has a show, solo show later this summer at the Center for Maine Contemporary Art in Rockland. And in the case of Lauren Fensterstock, people who know her work know she's sort of a latter-day Louise Nevelson. She makes cabinets and sometimes gardens, all monochrome, usually black. And in the case of the Triennial, it's a triptych of cabinets, and they're all overflowing with seashells, but they're not North Atlantic seashells, I don't think. I think that they're probably Caribbean seashells from the way they look. So her work is about how we make knowledge and how we understand the natural world. And Reggie Burroughs Hodges is an interesting case. He has a couple of the more traditional paintings in the show, because a lot of the work that's in the show is oriented toward installation or toward art as a form of research and investigation. But his paintings, two of them are of female figures in bathtubs, and Reggie Burroughs Hodges is an African-American artist. And these are all black figures, and he has gotten an enormous amount of attention nationally and internationally just in the past couple of years. And it so much so that last year one of his paintings went up for auction at Phillips in London. First time at auction, they had estimated the value at $40,000. It sold for $606,000.
Wow.
And he's won several major national and international awards. He's from California, went to the University of Kansas, was had a rap music band in New York for 15 years, and was also he played tennis at the University of Kansas and became a USTA certified tennis coach. And so a number of his paintings are these very dark, shadowy figures of tennis players. It has nothing to do with being in the North Atlantic. It could be a California show or a Kansas show. It just happens to be
in this show.
Yeah.
Are there other things other art that stood out to you, particularly in this show?
I mean, one of the things that I liked most, and I don't claim to quite understand why it works so well, but let me just make sure, see if I've got the right title. A Maine College of Art artist, teacher, Joshua Riemann, has a video, and I think of the 30 artists in the show, 7 of them show videos, which can sometimes be challenging for audiences, because the average I had in my review, I think it's 27 seconds is the average time that a visitor to a museum stands and looks at a work of art. So if you've got a video that in one case is 50 minutes long, my guess is nobody's going to watch 50 minutes of it. And one of the reasons they're not going to watch 50 minutes of the video is it is a video. I mean, it makes the point very simply and graphically, but it's about global warming, and it's a hand holding an ice cube for 50 minutes until the whole thing melts and rolls and runs away.
Right. Might not have to watch the whole thing.
But Riemann's video it's underwater video. The Greenland shark is the one I remember, and I think there was some clam, and urchin? No, I forget. But it's underwater video of marine life in the North Atlantic that is either rare or endangered. But the thing that's fascinating about it is that he had his 5-year-old son narrate it. And I haven't had a chance to talk to him, but when my kids were 5 years old, I don't think they could have read, a sustained narrative. And obviously he's not making it up, but there's something about, we're used to seeing the natural world presented by David Attenborough and the English accent and the voice of God, and to have a young child talking about things is very affecting.
And I know, one thing you observed is that attending this show, one needs to spend a lot of time, and really it bears a lot of viewing and repeat viewing, but there's a lot of other things going on at the museum, and this comes at a time when they're also planning a very significant expansion. How does it fit into that plan? I mean, do you see it? You've said that they're very ambitious people, and they're looking to do a lot with the museum, and there's this huge campaign underway. What are your thoughts about that?
It's an $85 million campaign that sort of is triggered by the purchase in 3 years ago, 2019, of what most people around here would remember as the former Children's Museum of Maine. Mm-hmm. And before that, it was the Chamber of Commerce building. And you and I probably remember when it was a movie theater. And in fact, every time, today I walked up to the Payson building on Congress Square, which opened in 1983, and every time I look at it, I first see the Libby building, which was in that place and was torn down for, everybody says, the I.M. Payson building. It was actually Henry Nichols Cobb, who designed it. He was with Pay's firm. But anyway, the part of the plan, or the major thrust of the plan, I think, is to add something like 60,000 square feet of both exhibition and programming space to the museum campus. And they have some nice aerials of the campus. And what I note is, it's people think of the museum being the Payson building, but it is connected to the Sweat Mansion, the Sweat Gallery, and the McClellan House, and then there is a separate house, beautiful, the Clapp House, which is on Spring Street,
right? And
that's not used for anything right now. So they've got now the Clapp House and the former Children's Museum space that they're planning, to renovate and use. And as I understand it, and I could be wrong, but the Children's Museum space is, they're thinking of sort of programming and also letting other organizations use the space in connection with the museum. And when I said a lot of ambitious, I mean, in recent years, the museum, acquired the Winslow Homer studio, and so they now, by appointment, run people out there in a little jitney, to see that landmark. But the thing that the way the North Atlantic Triennial informs the ambitions of the museum, I think, is that from starting with Mark Bessier, the director, and going through all of the curators, there seems to be in recent years a major effort to be inclusive, to sort of not just be the the white male canon of artists. So you're going to see a lot of women. You're going to see a lot of, artists of color. You're going to see, a more international flair, and that's to me one of the things that's been somewhat lacking over the years, over the 40 years that I've been. I mean, I started going there before the Payson Wing was there, and you'd go into the Sweat Memorial Galleries and see the dead pearl diver. That was my first experience of art, because my grandmother lived right down High Street, and she'd send me up to hang around the museum. But now
Well, we're just talking about all the changes in the museum. It's striking that, the history, it started as the Portland Society of Art in the 1800s, and the transformation just in the last 30 or 40 years to this major, I want to say regional, but maybe that's too small. It's got, this museum has a lot of national recognition for what it's trying to do, but also, and going a little off topic here, but one thing you've written about a lot and is a major, going to be a major topic in the city is the installation that's going to go into Congress Square by Sarah Z, which sort of complements this whole transformation that is going to go further even in this
the
metamorphosis.
whole Congress Square, the Maine Department of Transportation has it slated for redesign, and the Sarah Z piece will go in the Congress Square Park, right there at the corner of Congress and High Street, and it's been years in the making. I sometimes think, too long, or at least what the heck's going on, but you're dealing with the Maine Department of Transportation, so you have to go with their budgets and their timetables. But
well, the pictures are very exciting, and I perhaps tell our viewers she's a very major
absolutely
artist that we
mean,
have on board here.
She's a major New York international artist, and I guess that was the point that I was about to bring up, is the Portland Museum has not always paid as much attention as it might to bringing the art of the outside world here, and pushed, I think, by local cheerleaders and local artists. They're often going to have the major shows going to be Homer or Hartley or Marin or Wyeth or somebody having to do with Maine, which is fine because that's what people from away want to see when they come to Maine. But those of us who live here, would like to see Sarah Z, or somebody who you don't normally get to see. And it's a complex little bowl. Like her work sort of looks often like transistors and digital images all kind of exploding, and the art committee that selected her originally put out a request for proposals, and they didn't like anything that they got, and so they invited her and 2 or 3 other artists to come and make presentations.
Right. Well, the pictures that I've seen that you've shown are really very interesting. We actually only have a few minutes left, Edgar. Do you want to touch on any of the other shows that may be coming up this summer, or some other artists that you wanted to mention that were
in the context
museums and beyond,
of seeing work by artists beyond Maine? My favorite show so far this year has been Leslie Dill's Wilderness Show, which is up at Bates right now. It opened when the campus was closed, so finally got to see it. They're now open, but it's interesting because Leslie Dill, as you well know, grew up here in Falmouth and went to Waynfleet and is has been for years a major New York artist, and her primary inspiration has been Emily Dickinson, and she makes sort of costumed drama portraits, and the Bates show is I think it's 18 8-foot early American figures represented by clothing, and the clothing is covered by their written words. But there are a number of artists who have deep Maine connections that we rarely ever see here in Maine. So to me, that's a nice way to start expanding the scope, beyond Wyeth and Homer. Let's see Leslie Dill, and I can think of 6 or 8 other artists who either went to school in Maine or were born in Maine who people don't know yet.
Well, there's certainly so much happening in the art scene, and you've watched it for a long time and seen the transition and the changes and the excitement now and the exciting things that were going on even 20 years ago to get to this place, as you've mentioned. We're about out of time. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any other
thoughts? I mentioned the show that I'm looking forward to most this summer. 2 of them are the Reggie Burroughs Hodges show at the Center for Maine Contemporary Art.
And when is that?
May 28th through September something.
Okay.
And then here at the Portland Museum of Art is a retrospective of Catherine Bradford, and Kathy's somebody who is now in New York most of the time, but has had an enormous success and coming out of Brunswick.
Right. Edgar, this we all need to spend a lot of time getting to these shows this summer, and especially the big museum show. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been fun and very educational for our readers. Thank you. And thank you to the Portland Media Center for their help. Please join us again next month for another edition of Portland Rising.